Rabbi Stein, welcome back to Yerushalmi Pesachim. Now, we couldn't make it yesterday, but we are here today. We are Perek Shishi Halacha Dalet, which is on page 49a. Now, usually, you would bring the Korban Pesach, you would bring with it an additional korban, which is called the Chagiga of the 14th. Now, we're going to explain when do you bring this korban and when don't you bring it. So, Chagiga, when do you bring with the Korban Pesach a Chagiga on the 14th? Bisman Shehu Babachol. First of all, the 14th is on a weekday, and betahara, that everyone is tahar, and the Pesach is done in a state of purity. Over mu'at, and that means where there's not enough meat on the animal to satisfy everyone who's on the group, so we bring another korban chagiga, and you eat it before you eat for the Korban Pesach, so that you eat the Korban Pesach in a state of satisfaction. But bisman shu ba b'Shabbos, when the 14th is on Shabbos, or bimaruba, where there's enough flesh to satisfy all the group without adding another korban, or v'tuma, or if the majority of people were defiled from dead bodies, etc., and they bring Korban Pesach b'tuma. In these situations, ein mevin imar chagiga. You don't have to bring a chagiga, right? Shabbos, because chagiga doesn't push away Shabbos. But Meruba, basically, there's no need for it. If there's enough food for everyone, you don't need to bring another korban. The Pesach is enough to provide satisfaction. And impurity, because Chagiga doesn't push away impurity, right? Only the Korban Pesach. Okay. Chagiga haisaba min adzayin and min abaka. You can bring it from sheep or cattle, min akasav min ozim, sheep or goats, and it's not like Korban Pesach, which comes from sheep and not from cattle. And also, the chagiga comes min azachar min hakez, male and female. And it can be eaten 2 days and 1 night, and not like the Korban Pesach, which only can be eaten on the leil, the night of the first night. Yeah. Tiny Chagiga Sabasa, Haisabah min Amasa. The chagiga of the 14th, you could bring it for Masa Sheni money, which you bring to Yerushalmi to buy food to eat. You can use that for buying your chagiga. Rabbi Yaakov Baracha b'Shem Shmuel Barabba, he says, it must be it's not an obligation, because in Tema Chayva, if it was an obligation, how can you use Maaseh money to fulfill your obligation? It can't be. So it must be it's Rishus. I mean, it makes sense to say it's Rishus, because if you have a lot of meat there and you don't need another korban, so it's obviously not a Chayv, because, if you've got enough food for everyone, you don't need to bring it at all. All right. Now, Tani Rublan, Chagiga B'Omer Pesach, when you would bring the Chagiga with the Korban Pesach, you eat the Chagiga first. So the Korban Pesach is eaten in a state of satisfaction. But what's the reason for this? Why must it be like that? Why can't you eat it not being satisfied? The reason is we don't need to be so ravenous that, you're going to eat the meat and you're going to, around the bones, you might break the bones, you'll be over the lav, right? It had to be eaten in a state of decorum and regality, and not like the hungry crowds who are breaking the bones to get every last drop of meat. And that's why the Chachamim set up as you should eat the Korban Pesach on being satisfied. Tiny we've learned, Chagiga Abayma Pesach, if you ate the Chagiga with the Korban Pesach, now, it had to be eaten till the time that the Pesach had to be eaten. Now, wait a minute. It's a Chamiv. We've just said Chagiga Nechaz Shnei Yomim, 2 days and 1 night. So what's going now? Your Pesach Nechal Ad Chatzos. Pesach is till midnight. But Tema Hachain, you say you have to get rid of it at the same time as the Korban Pesach. So Gemara is answering, when you're eating them together on the table, bits of one meat might have gotten mixed to the other meat, and that's why you have to get rid of them both at the same time. Right? If it wasn't with the Pesach on the table, then you're allowed to eat it till the end of the 2 days and the 1 night. And the Brisa says, not only Chagiga has to get removed with the Korban Pesach if it's on the table, but other Chulin foods as well need to be removed for the same reason. Oh, Rabbi Isa, this tells me, if someone eats cheese, and you want to go now and eat meat, you have to remove from the table the bits of bread which were on the table at the time when you ate the cheese, because maybe they stick a bit to the cheese and you should not eat it with the meat. Yeah, don't use the same bread between the milky meal and the meaty meal. We come back to Korban Pesach, halacha hey. Yeah, we come back to the idea of Korban Pesach pushing away Shabbos. Now, what about someone who slaughters a Korban Pesach on Shabbos wrongly? So the korban's possible. So he's broken Shabbos for no reason. He's chayav b'chatas if he did it b'shogeg. Now, there's also an argument, the famous argument of someone who makes a mistake in a mitzvah. He had a kavanah to do a mitzvah, but for whatever reason, he ended up doing an avera with a chatas. Is he chayav chatas? His intention was to do a mitzvah, but something went wrong. So today we're going to discuss this. So Pesach sheshachta shaloi lishma b'Shabbos. So on Erev Pesach, 14th, which is Shabbos, and he's slaughtering, but he didn't have in mind the Korban Pesach, which he's meant to be slaughtering. He's thinking it's for another Korban. Like b'shogeg, he thought, just like I can slaughter Korban Pesach, I can slaughter it for another purpose, for Shlomim or whatever it is, for some other purpose. Right? Some say it's a case where he forgot it was Shabbos, and he's just slaughtering any animal. Anyway, chayav olav chatas. He is liable for a chatas because this korban is pasul. We said chatas and Pesach have to be lishmai, right? These are korbanos have to be done for the right purpose. Otherwise, they're pasul. And you've not fulfilled the mitzvah of korban Pesach. He's broken Shabbos b'shogeg. Shar kol hazvachim sheshachta. Now, any other korban that he slaughtered on Erev Pesach or Shval and Shabbos, l'shema Pesach, for the sake of Pesach, now it depends. If these korbanos einon ru'uyin are not really fitting at all to be a korban Pesach, like a calf or a 2-year ram or a female, if it's not even fitting that it could possibly be a korban Pesach, then the din is chayav. Then he's liable for chatas. You brought something which completely could not be a korban Pesach, and you're liable for chatas. Now, it's not called making a mistake in the Dvar Mitzvah, because everyone knows you can't use your female for a korban Pesach, right? And you shouldn't have made such a mistake. Im ru'uyin, if, however, they were fitting to be brought as a korban Pesach, if you'd sanctified them for the sake of korban Pesach, for example, a sheep, a male sheep, a year old, let's say it could be a shlomim for the sake of Pesach, so then we have an argument. Rabbi Lezer says you're liable for Chil Shabbos, that he holds even T'ed Dvar Mitzvah, you're liable. Rabbi Yeshua Paiter, Yeshua says no, you're not liable. He held, if you made a mistake thinking you were doing a mitzvah, you don't have to bring a chatos. And this person is making a mistake in a mitzvah. He was busy thinking he's slaughtering his korban Pesach, and he made a mistake and he ended up bringing this animal, which wasn't a korban Pesach. Yeah, it was for something else in the end. But he was trying to do a mitzvah in his mind, but he made a mistake. So Rabbi Yeshua says you don't have to bring a korban. But Rabbi Lezer says you do. Rabbi Lezer, Ma'ima Pesach Shu Mutar Lishma. Now, you're allowed to slaughter on this Shabbos a Pesach for the sake of Shabbos. But if you slaughter Pesach for something else, then I'm afraid it doesn't work. And you're chayiv, you're definitely liable, as we said in the Mishnah. Right? Pesach for the sake of Shloi Lishma is possible, right? So you're chayiv. So there's vachim, other korbanos, shehein asuri lishma, which you can't shech them on Shabbos even for their own sake, right? Because sheshina es shemam, now you've changed it and slaughtered it for Pesach, ein adin shechayiv. How much more so you should be liable for a chatos? So he's saying other korbanos, which lishma on Shabbos you can't slaughter other korbanos Shabbos, which is the 40. You can't, even for the sake of taida or whatever, you can't do it. So now you've got to change it, thinking it's something else, and you think, I'll make it a Pesach. So I'm afraid, of course, you should be chayav chatos. That's what Rabbi Lezer says. No, I don't agree. A Pesach, it's all very well with Pesach. Look, you shechted it for the sake of other korbanos which you mustn't shecht on Shabbos. So therefore, you didn't have any intention for a mitzvah that pushes away Shabbos. You're not called making a mistake in a Dvar mitzvah. As opposed to, Toma, you're going to say you're liable. You've changed them to something permitted. You had, let's say, a tide offering, and you had it in mind for a korban Pesach. But korban Pesach can be offered now. So you've changed it to be something permitted, which is a mitzvah, which is the right time for it. So you therefore are making a mistake in a Dvar mitzvah. That's what Rabbi Yeshua said back. Rabbi Lezer says, but what about communal offerings, where the Torah says you bring them on Shabbos, like the Tamid, for example, or the Musaf? Well, they will prove to you, they can be brought on Shabbos, that is the mitzvah to bring them. But if you shecht other korbanos for their sake, you shechta something else for the sake of a tamid, I'm afraid you're chayiv, you're liable. So even though you're shechting for the sake of a korban which is permitted to be brought on this Shabbos, you are still liable, even though you are still making a mistake in a dvar mitzvah. So it's the same thing, if you shecht other korbanos, the Shem Pesach, you should be liable. Comes back Rabbi Yeshua, he says, no, I don't agree. No. In Mamatave Murei Tzibur, it's all very well. Communal offerings, Yishach Lishma, Yochayev Chatos, that's because Yesh Lahen Kitzvah, they have like a fixed number as to how much are brought. And since it's already slaughtered, everyone knows, look, we don't need to slaughter anymore. We know there's 2 tamids a day. We don't need to slaughter anymore. So if you're shechting other korbanos, you're not tired of making a mistake on a dvar mitzvah, you're shaking. You shouldn't have made such a mistake. Tomer b'Pesach, however, how can you say the same thing with Korban Pesach? She'ein la kitzvah. There's no limit to how many Korban Pesach you might bring. Everyone needs to bring it. You know, you see other people who are involved in it, you're also torod with this mitzvah, so you're torod dvar mitzvah, therefore Rabbi Yeshua says you're patur. So that's what back and forth. Rabbi Lezer said you should be liable, Rabbi Yeshua says you should be patur. Now then we come along with Rameh. Rameh argues on the matter that Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua agreed. Now they said if you shecht other korbanos for korbanos tzibur, you're liable. Rameh, af hashochet l'shem emurei tzibur, you slaughter other korbanos for the sake of tzibur communal things, you're still patur. Even though there's a finite amount. He says it is included in making a mistake in a dvar mitzvah, and you are still patur. Okay. Now the Gemara explains the ratio, the first part of the Mishnah, that Pesach, which was slaughtered shloi lishmai, on Shabbos, you are chayav chatas. Right? Pesach, you shech shloi lishmai, is possible, and therefore you're chayav. Masnisa, that is, b'yodea by shehu Pesach, you knew it's a Korban Pesach, v'shachta l'shem shlamim, and intentionally you decided I'm making it a shlamim. It wasn't a mistake. Right? You thought I can shecht a Pesach shloi lishmai on Shabbos. However, but if you was making a mistake, you thought it was a shlamim. You actually thought this was a shlamim, and you slaughtered it shem shlamim. It's not possible. Shloi lishmai by mistake is not a forbidden machshava, right? And it's like shechting for the sake of Pesach, that it's kosher and there's no chilul Shabbos. So he's saying it's talking about a case where you intentionally made it a shlamim. But if you honestly thought it was a shlamim, then you wouldn't be chayav for that. Now, what about making a mistake and removing the mistake? Let's see. So, let's say you thought you have in front of you a shlamim, but then shachta l'shem oila, and you intend, right, I'm going to make this an oila. But at the end of the day, you're having kavanah for shloi lishma, but you make a mistake. You thought it's a shlamim, and now you're thinking for oila. Now, had you known it was a Pesach, maybe you wouldn't shechted it for oila. But you did know it was you thought it was a shlamim, and you're making it into an oila. Now, what happens now? So let's see. Rav Mana Amar, he says, Yesh b'asiyos mitzvah. You know, it's really a Pesach at the end of the day. So it is kosher. It's like removal by mistake. Had you known it was a Pesach, you would never have done the oila offering, the oila kavanah. And your whole mistake wasn't really an akira. Rabbi Yosef Amar, ein b'asiyos mitzvah. He says, no, it's possible. No mitzvah at all. Even what you thought is a shlamim, you wanted to remove that and make it shloi lishma. You wanted to make it oila. You hear that? Your intention was to remove what you knew. Now Rav Mana comes along, and Rav Mana says, no, you have done a mitzvah. Let's see. He brings a support to his view that this machshava is considered akira batos, like you've removed it out of doubt. That's not called removal. Let's see. Eilei tzibur. You've got the 2 rams, let's say the sheep, which are 2 years old. Not the normal kvasim, which are in their 1 year, but to the rams, which are like 2 years old. And you bring them as an oila on Shavuos. Shahaya sabo shehen kvasim. And you thought they're the 2 kivsei atzeres, which is the shamei tzibur, the shlamim, which is brought on Shavuos. L'shachta n'shem elim. So you thought they were the younger animals, and then you have in mind, you shech them, shalai lishma, for the sake of oila, and you made a mistake. Shem alei alo l'tzibur l'shem elim. But it totally came. And we've learned in a brayso, Eilei tzibur, the communal rams, Shrei Sava Shein Kvasim, you thought they were younger sheep. As opposed to, right? Now, as opposed to, this will remind us of where we're holding now. As opposed to Shechting Pesach Shaloi Lishmai. Now, on the 14th in the afternoon, you can't shecht any other korbanos anyway. No one's going to make a mistake. You're going to be turbid van mitzvah. Everyone knows there's only one korban you can bring on Erev Pesach in the afternoon. And also, the answer Rabbi Yeshua himself gave to Rabbi Eliezer, you know what Rabbi Yeshua answered? He made a distinction between davar asur and davar mutar. I mean, that's not really strong enough for the question of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer can answer back. Ruvain's korban Pesach, slaughtered for the sake of Shimon, is possible. You changed it for something permitted. Korban Pesach can be brought now. Although Shimon's allowed to bring his korban on Shabbos. The Tema Chayev, nevertheless, you have to agree to me that you are Chayev Chatos for it. So even if you change for Davar Mutar, you're Chayev Chatos. You don't get an exemption because of Torah Dvar Mitzvah. So it's saying you're shechting other korbanos for Shem Pesach, you should be Chayev, and not like what you, Rabbi Shua, want to say. Now the Gemara doesn't actually answer those questions. Now we bring Reb Meir now. Reb Meir, if you shecht for the sake of other imurim, communal offerings, you are patur. Reb Meir held afilu egel. He held if you shecht another korban for the sake of Pesach, right? Even if it was a calf, which can't be a korban Pesach, he says you're patur. You're making a mistake in Dvar Mitzvah. He argues on what we said in our Mishnah, that if you shecht korbanos which are not fitting for Pesach, you're chayav chatos, right? Apart from the fact that if shecht Shem and Murei Tzibur, he argues that. So he holds that you're Torah Dvar Mitzvah even if you're shechting a calf. From the words of Rabbi Eliezer, we can learn Rabbi Meir argues in our Mishnah on two different points. So first of all, we learn he argues he patters from chatzos even davar sheyesh lo kitzvah, even something which is finite, like you're shechting for the Murei Tzibur, where there aren't that many korbanos of the communal offerings. But davar she'en darkel is chalef. And also, right, something which can't get confused. He patters even something which can't get confused, like slaughtering a calf. How can a calf be a korban Pesach? He's still pattered. The yesh b'asiyasa mitzvah. And even the Reb Meir pattered the one who shechts on Shabbos from Chatzos, because Doed mitzvah, even in these things, nevertheless, these words are said when he's actually done a mitzvah, like he's slaughtering a korban for a Murei Tzibur, or for Pesach. So korban which is slaughtered shloi lishmai, it's kosher, you're fulfilling a mitzvah. But if you're slaughtering a korban where it's possible and you've not kept any mitzvah, then we don't find Reb Meir pattering in such a case. There's got to be something where there's some sort of mitzvah there. Now we got Machlokes Amoraim about this making a mistake into our mitzvah when there's no mitzvah in result. So let's see. Reish Lakish Omar, yesh b'asiyaseh mitzvah, something which you're not patur for dvar mitzvah, unless there is a mitzvah. There's got to be a mitzvah that come out. Yeah? Although you did the mitzvah with an Avera, there's got to be some sort of mitzvah that's come out. Kigon, for example, Yevimtai Nida. So his Yevama, right, his wife of levirate marriage is Yevama, and she's a Nida, or Ba'aleha, and he's with her, and he has the sake Kavanah for mitzvah of Yibum, but he didn't know, let's say, she was a Nida, he didn't know she was menstruate. He's pater from Chatas on that relationship. He's tov dvar mitzvah, because there's a mitzvah's Yibum over here. If, however, he makes a mistake with a mitzvah, and he's not for doing any mitzvah, he doesn't do any mitzvah then he's chayav chatos, even though he had the right intentions. Rabbi Yochanan ein b'asiyaseh mitzvah. If you can make a mistake with a dvar mitzvah, you're pater b'chatos, even if you don't fulfill a mitzvah with your action. For example, Kigoin, Shnei Shapudin, you have two spits of roasted meat, Echad Shel Shchuta, one is kodshim, which is slaughtered properly, it's a mitzvah to eat it within the time, but Echad Shel Noisa, and one which should have been eaten already is now too late, the kores to eat it. He ate the Noisa instead of eating the meat he should have eaten. So he's pater from chatos and eating the Noisa. His kavanah was to do the mitzvah. And he's tov b'dvar mitzvah, he picked up the wrong spit, right? He should have picked up the right one. Even though he didn't do any mitzvah in the end, there's no mitzvah by eating Noisa, right? But he intended, well, I want to eat the right one, but he ended up getting the wrong one.
It's funny, because the curse here is Nevela. And it wouldn't make much difference.
Let's see, what's wrong with that guess? So let's say, Shnei Shepudin, Echad Shel Shchuta, Echad Shel Nevela. And he wanted to eat one, and he ended up eating the other one. So what do they say here in the notes? The Nom Yerushalmi, by eating nevela, there's no chatas. Yeah, there wouldn't be a chatas in nevela. It would be a lav. So it must be Naisa, which has chiv kares, amazing, and chatas. Right, and the Sugya in Bavli as well also mentions that. Okay. Masnisa pliga av Rish Lakish. So Rish Lakish said what? Rish Lakish said that if there is a mitzvah involvement somehow, yeah, then there's got to be a mitzvah involvement to have the exemption of what I was doing a mitzvah. Yeah, there's got to be some sort of mitzvah coming out of it. That's what Rish Lakish said. So Masnisa pliga Rish Lakish. Our Mishnah in Shabbos seems to argue on Rish Lakish. Now, remember the famous Mishnah in Shabbos. Someone had 2 children. And remember, the Mishnah in Bavli is not the same as the Mishnah in Yerushalmi, and that's the whole discussion in its own right. But anyway, someone has 2 children, Perek Ruleza Demila, they both need a bris. Now, there's various girsais in the various Mishnahs, right? Is it a Shabbos baby and a Sunday baby, or is it a Friday baby and a Shabbos baby, right? But let's start here. What's the case here? But we're going to start with the case where there's 2 children. One should be on the Sunday, and one should be on the Shabbos. 2 children to have a bris, one on Shabbos, one on Sunday. V'shachach, now the guy forgets, what am I doing now? Right? What is Shabbos morning, and he forgets. Omal es shalacha Shabbos b'Shabbos. He ended up doing the Sunday one on Shabbos morning. You hear that? The premature one he does. He does the Sunday one on Shabbos morning. He's broken Shabbos. He's given a bris to a child who didn't need it. Rabbi Lezer Machayev Chatos. Rabbi Lezer says you're liable. Rabbi Shua Paita. Rabbi Shua says no, you thought you were doing a mitzvah. But Harei Ein Basiyase mitzvah. Now wait a minute, you didn't do any mitzvah here. A Sunday bris on Shabbos morning on day 7, there's no mitzvah there. How can Rabbi Shua Paita? Rabbi Shua Paita? So you see, Tov Dvar mitzvah, even if you're not doing any mitzvah at all. Now, Shmuel Kabodki Amar, he answers, well, look, Lemacha yesh basiyase mitzvah. Look, there is a mitzvah to give a bris to this child when the 8th day comes. Now, you're right, now, there's no mitzvah. But there is a mitzvah tomorrow. Therefore, your potter Tov Dvar mitzvah, it was on your mind, you knew you had a mitzvah to do. Well, yeah, you should have done it tomorrow, and you've done it today. But at least you've got a mitzvah in your head to do. As opposed to eating nicer, right? Eating nicer is no mitzvah at all. Not today and not tomorrow. And therefore, you're chayav chatas. Now we bring a member of Rabbi Yochanan about that Mishnah in Shabbos. Our Rabbi Yochanan, the Rameh. The Mishnah is the view, that's the way Rameh taught the argument, Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Shua. Rameh said, Dava sheyesh v'asiyasai mitzvah, pato. He says, according to everyone, when you make a mistake in a mitzvah and you actually do a mitzvah, for example, giving a bris on Shabbos to a child who should have had the bris on Friday. You hear me? When are you doing something of a mitzvah? Now, the Friday baby born, you don't usually do the bris on Shabbos, right? We only do it on Shabbos when it's the 8th day. But you got mixed up, and the Friday baby, you should have had it on the Friday, you did it a day late on Shabbos morning. So there is a bit of a mitzvah there. And that's where mitzvah patur. That's a case where you might be patur. Whereas mitzvah, by the case of our Mishnah, you do the Sunday bris on Shabbos, you done no mitzvah at all. The machlokes is an argument of Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Shua. Could Rabbi Lezer be liable? Could Rabbi Shua be a patur? This was the view of Rabbi Meir to explain the argument of Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Shua. And like the view of Rabbi Meir is the Mishnah in Masechet Shabbos. Fine. You hear that? Should we summarize again? He said, look, if you do, the argument is when you do the Friday one on Shabbos, that's the argument. Because you did something which was right. Something. But the Sunday one on Shabbos, there's no argument. You've definitely done wrong. Now, Rav Shimon said, Davar she'ein basiyasai mitzvah. If you did something which is no mitzvah at all, the Sunday one on Shabbos, chayav. Everyone holds you're liable. 1 second, let me just see this again. Sorry, no, I've got to change it around slightly. What I just said is not right. Let's go back a bit. So Rameir says, look, if you're doing a bit of a mitzvah, everyone holds it's fine. So the Friday one on Shabbos, he says there's no argument. Everyone holds your potel. Yeah, the Friday one on Shabbos.
Davish Yosemite, something.
Davish Yosemite, so potel. You don't. Even Rabbi Lezer will say a potel. You've done a bit of a mitzvah here. The Friday one on Shabbos, everyone holds it's fine. At least you're not chayav. Whereas the Sunday one on Shabbos, that's the argument. That was the way Rav Meir said it. Now we come along to Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon Omer, Davish She'ein B'Siyasei Mitzvah. The Sunday one on Shabbos, you get the chop. Chayav. You're liable. Kares. Even Rabbi Yeshua, Chatzos, whatever it is. Even Rabbi Yeshua never patted that. But Davar Sheyesh B'Siyasei Mitzvah, the Friday one on Shabbos, which is a bit of a mitzvah, but machlokas, that's the argument. So Rav Shimon says the argument is Friday one on Shabbos, and Rav Meir said the argument is Sunday one on Shabbos. Okay? Now, the Gemara comes back to our Mishnah. One who shechs on Shabbos, other karbonos for the sake of a Pesach. Rabbi Yeshua patted you from a chatos if these karbonos were fitting for Korban Pesach. If it was a sort of animal that could be brought, it was a male, etc., Rabbi Yeshua patted you. Now we see that our Mishnah is like the view of Rav Shimon. We're going to try and compare the cases of the two kids and the mitzvahs that are done to you're bringing the carbon for the sake of the other carbon. We're going to try and compare the cases here. So we're going to see the Mishnah. Our Mishnah is like the view of Rav Shimon, which is how he learned the argument of Rav Lezer Rabbi Yeshua. Let's remind ourselves. Rav Shimon said, if you do the Sunday one on Shabbos, you're liable. And if you do the Friday one on Shabbos, there's an argument. So the Gemara is going to bring Rabbi Yochanan talking about this. Rabbi Yossi B'Shem Rabbi Yochanan. Divrei Rav Shimon. It should be the version of Rav Shimon. You got Rav Shimon's gears to that? This words Rav Shimon. If you bring another korban for the sake of Pesach, you're part of providing Uhu Shiehei Ser Tamim. It's got to be a lamb, whatever, perfect Ben Shana, which is fitting for Korban Pesach. Ushlamim, and it should be like a Korban Shlamim, similar, which is kosher when you slaughter it Shaloi Lishmo. So when you slaughter it L'Shem Pesach, you're doing a bit of a mitzvah, right? It's going to be a Shlamim or whatever it is. It's the right animal, and you slaughter it, it'll be a Shlamim, where Shaloi Lishmo is a bit of a mitzvah. You fulfilled a bit of a mitzvah here, right? Rav Shua Pater is something where you use a bit of a mitzvah, and the korban is a valid korban, right? And it's fitting to change. You might have thought it's a Korban Pesach, it's the right age, it's the right male status, right? However, if you shech tzvachim which are not fitting, like a calf, for example, you're liable, chayav chatzos. From the words of Shimon, we can learn three things. First of all, the p'tur of making a mistake dvar mitzvah is got to be something davar she'ein like mitzvah. Something like Korban Pesach, which is unlimited, as opposed to Emurei Tzibur, right, which had a definite limited amount. But Davar Shadaka Lahachlif, it's got to be something which could be mistaken for a Korban Pesach, like the Ser Tamim, the male within the first year, as opposed to things which are not fitting. And Davar Sheyesh B'Siyasei Mitzvah, and something which you're doing a mitzvah by doing it, like you have a korban which you shecht as a shlamim, which is kosher when you shechted it for the same Pesach, as opposed to Yishach Pesach Shloi Lishma, it's possible. Now Rabbi Shua came back to Rav Meir and said, wait a minute, Emurei Tzibur, they have a fixed amount. How can you tell me the same about Pesach, which has no fixed amount? Ma'izlach, what does it mean, Davar She'ein Lo Kitzvah? It hasn't got a fixed, a limited, a finite amount. What does that mean? Rabbi Yirmiyah, he wanted to say, Ein Lo Kitzvah means, Shloi no Torah Kitzvah. Look, the Torah never gave a maximum limit how many Korban Pesach should be brought, yeah? The Torah never gave a maximum on that, right? But Rabbi Yossi Savamema, he wanted to say it doesn't mean that. What does it mean? You cannot work out how many are brought. There's so many, it's easy to make a mistake and think that, this is a Pesach, you bring it for the sake of Pesach. There's no way to know how many there are, so you might think, right, this is a Pesach, whatever it is. Right? Now, Rabbi Yosef Look, when he learned the drosh of the Mishnahs in Masechet Shabbos about the children and the mole made a mistake and he did them on the wrong day. He used to say like this. Rabbi Yirmiyah taught us right. He said, can you honestly say that what? That something which hasn't got a fixed amount. Remember, we just quoted two Pirushim, right? We just said, what does it mean, something which is unlimited? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, the Torah never gave a limit to how many to shecht. Rabbi Yossi wanted to say, you can't fathom the numbers. There are two interpretations as to what this means. So it comes on Rabbi Yossi now, top of Nun Aleph on the base. He says, when he learned this sugya, he said, which is the right interpretation of unlimited? He says, Yafalim Dana Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah's interpretation is right. Because the same thing you can explain with the children. Islach Meima, can you honestly say that something unlimited means you can't count it? It's too many? Come Pesach, you can't count. Children, you can't count. There's only two children here. One needs a bris on Shabbos, and one needs it on a weekday. If you can't count that, you've got serious trouble, right? So it's Davar Sheshlei is something which has a limit, which won't have a Torah of Torah b'dvar mitzvah. How can you be sure part of the moil from a chatas? Ella, you have to say the way Rabbi Yirmiyah explained it. Something which hasn't got a limit means the Torah never gave a limit how many times Shabbos can be broken that day. Yeah, the Torah never said how many couples can push away Shabbos, and the same thing with Milah on Shabbos. The Torah never said how many bris Milahs can push away Shabbos. Right? Every baby born on Shabbos, day 8, if the baby's healthy, pushes away Shabbos. The Torah never gave a maximum amount on that. Any child, at the time of the bris is the 8 days Shabbos, you do the bris on Shabbos. And that's why it's called Torah b'dvar mitzvah. Because there's no way of you knowing how many could be breaking Shabbos for this. Now, Amar Rav Chisda, according to Rav Chisda said, Divrei Rav Shimon, according to Rav Shimon, Shimon's Tana Kama of our Mishnah, he said there's no din of Torah b'dvar mitzvah unless it hasn't got, only with something which hasn't got a limit at all. It's not like Rameir. Even a Merid Tzibur. He says, no, it's got to be something without a limit. Tifta, we can explain our Mishnah, where Rabbi Yeshua Patters, bringing other korbanos for the sake of Pesach, Shahaya Sham Chabura Achas Shalei Shachta. You know what? There was still one group. Why did you make a mistake? There was still one group that needed to bring a Korban Pesach. Yeah, there was still one group who hadn't brought it yet. And since they were still busy, Korban Pesach, the Sheichet is potter from slaughtering another korban for the sake of Pesach for Torah mitzvah. If everyone's already slaughtered, then I'm afraid there's no Torah of Torah mitzvah. You can't say, oh, I was busy with mitzvah. Everyone's bought their korban Pesach already. Now the Gemara brings some wording of Rav Yanai about the Mishnah which is mentioned in Masechet Shabbos of the children. Let's see. Arazora. Mil said Rav Yanai Amra. Now, this is a continuation again. What do we see from Rav Yanai? V'hu sheshachach. Right. Umal Eshel Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. Now, it says in the Mishnah in Shabbos, according to one of the versions, one of the Gersas, right? You have two children. One had needed a bris on Friday. One needed a bris on Shabbos. You went and did the Shabbos one on Friday. Got me? Still with me? One needs Friday, one needs Shabbos. You went and did the Shabbos one on Friday. Now, you end up doing the Friday one on Shabbos. 1 second. Two children, one the meal is Friday, one on Shabbos, and you went and did the Shabbos one. Okay. Sorry, no. On the Shabbos day, you did the Friday one. That's the case. On the Shabbos day, you did the Friday one, a day late.
On the Shabbos day, you did?
On the Shabbos, that's where we are now. On Shabbos, you did the Friday one. And you're Chayav Chatas. Why am I Chayav Chatas? I've got a child that needs a bris today. Yeah, but you did yesterday's. But why am I Chayav Chatas? Why? It's talking about a case where already on the Friday, yesterday, you did the bris on the Shabbos one. You hear that? So you had nothing bothering you on Shabbos day now for a bris to do, because the Shabbos one which you should have done today, you did yesterday. So therefore, Now you went and did the Friday one on Shabbos. There was nothing bothering you. You are chayav chatos. You follow? You only had a milah for a child from yesterday. You only had this child. There's no mitzvah to do it on Shabbos. You're not told with mitzvah. You're chayav chatos. If, however, you did not do the Shabbos one on Friday, so when you come Shabbos morning, you have both children in front of you. One which is Friday's bris, which is you're doing now, and one is Shabbos's. So you have a mitzvah to do today. And then you do the bris on Shabbos morning, the child from Friday, he says you're parter from chatos because you're busy with a mitzvah because you knew you've got the Shabbos one still to do. Now, molo b'shachris. So what about if I went already on Shabbos morning at sunrise. I went and did the bris of Shabbos morning on Shabbos morning, which was fine. Now 2 hours later, I do the Friday one on Shabbos afternoon. Do I still have the exemption? We didn't have any mitzvahs to do then. You went by mistake, you did the Friday one on Shabbos lunch. Are you chayav chatos? Or maybe you're potter because your term is by mitzvah. Well, you already did today's one this morning. Reb Zaira said, Sava Rabbi Yana held. You know what? When you did that Shabbos one early in the morning, potter, you are potter for doing the Friday one lunchtime. Because you did have this mitzvah milah on this Shabbos. Now, even though you've already carried it out by the time you do the second bris, now that you've done it by mistake, the second child, you're still term mitzvah mitzvah. It's not the same as someone who did the bris on the Shabbos baby on Friday morning. It's not the same as when you did it yesterday. When Shabbos came in, you had no bris to do. Here, at least when Shabbos came in, I had a bris to do. But you ended up doing it early in the morning. But I had a bris to do. So that's what Reb Zaira holds in the name of Rabbi Yana. So as long as you had a bris to do when Shabbos came in, and you ended up doing the wrong one, you're tov is bar mitzvah. Rav Abba said you really are liable. Because now, Shabbos afternoon, how many kids are there in front of me? There's one child in front of me. I'm not tov b'tar mitzvah. This child should have had a bris yesterday. There's no allowance for today. There's no other brises to do. So now, there's no mitzvah milah on you. There's no tov b'tar mitzvah. But laita milah amra Rabbi Yanai. Now, for what matter? When did Rabbi Yanai say that you're doing the bris of Shabbos on the Friday? Why did he mention that? Why didn't he just say you did the bris of the child on Shabbos morning? Because that way he said you'd be liable in such a case where you did the bris Shabbos in the morning. Why not mention that case? He says you're chayav. Why mention that you did it yesterday? Because he would say the same thing if you did it this morning. He's telling you how he wants to explain how a person can make a mistake. You'll make a mistake between the children. You'll think this child, which is a bris on Shabbos, is the child that needed a bris on the Friday, and that's why he gave a bris, right? It's not common that you'll make a mistake and do both children on Shabbos. You know that only one's meant to be done on Shabbos. Now, the word comes back to the words of Rav Chisda, that the P'tor of Tov Bar Mitzvah in our Mishnah is only when there was like a group who hadn't yet shechted. Adate de Reb Zaira, according to the view of Reb Zaira, Reb Yanai would like Rav Chisda. This can fit in like Reb Yanai and not Rav Chisda. Now, according to Reb Zaira, the children, Reb Yanai pattered from a chatos even if you went and did in Shachris the Shabbos bris, he says you're still patur. So Reb Yanai is not like Rav Chisda. Why? Reb Yanai said the p'tur of Tov Dvar Mitzvah, if even when you're doing your bris, there's only one child here. But when Shabbos came in, I had two. So you're still patur, even though now there's only one child. And the child whose man was on Shabbos has already had a bris. So it's the same thing. If you bring another carbon for the sake of Pesach, even though all of Pesachim have all been brought, I only have this one carbon here, you are still patur for Fire B'Dvar Mitzvah. And not like Rav Chisda, who said you are liable in such a case. Yeah, you see the comparison. It's like all the karbanos have been brought. He still says you're patur. And same idea. Look, the other Shabbos baby has already had his bris. There's none left. There's only this child, Friday's bris now. You're still patur. Now Ramona asked, on the question of the Gemara from Rav Yana and Rav Chisda. Amar Rabbana, Kum Rav Yosef. Ma'ata Amar Rav Chisda, Rav Shimon. Now that which Rav Chisda said is like Rav Shimon, like Rav Chisda explained, that is according to Rav Shimon. Ma'ata Rav Yana is Rav Meir. His words fit in with the words of Rav Meir. So basically they're speaking these two Amoraim, and one fits in like one Tana, and one fits in like another Tana. Now you can't ask one Tana on another Tana. The Tanaim can argue, right? So if one is speaking and he fits in with one opinion, the other speaks and he's speaking like another opinion, how are they asking on each other? So Meshivim ben Rav Meir Rav Shimon, how can you ask from Rav Meir's view on Rav Shimon's view? Rav Meir is lenient with Torah Dvar Mitzvah more than Rav Shimon was. Rav Meir says you're possible even with a limited amount. When you've not done a mitzvah, Rav Shimon said you're liable. And it could be they're arguing. According to Rav Meir, you're possible even if you have no mitzvah left. Right, the Shabbos morning one was done Shabbos morning. There's no korbanos left, and Rav Shimon says you're chayav. So how is Rav Yanai, who exempts, right, which is in the view of Rav Meir, asking on Rav Chisda, who obligates, which is the view of Rav Shimon? So Gemara says Ashkachnan Peluga. Do we ever find? He said, you know why? Look, we don't find Rav Meir and Rav Shimon arguing on this. He says, Ein bein Rav Meir and Rav Shimon b'shir. Do we ever find an argument in this point? If the P'tur of Torah Dvar Mitzvah applies when there's still a bit of a mitzvah to do, right? Maybe the Shabbos bris has not yet been done, or not all the kabbalas have not yet been slaughtered. We don't find they argue in this point. They argue in other things. In this point, we don't find that they argue. So who says they argue? They probably don't argue. And that's why we can ask from the words of Rav Yanai and Rav Chisda that even though Rav Yanai was said in the view of Rav Meir, and Rav Chisda was said in the view of Rav Shimon. Okay, we will stop here for now. A few more lines. Okay, fine. A few more lines. So these children, in the Mishnah we said, the Mars made a mistake on the day of the bris. He does them by mistake on Shabbos. How do we judge it? Kedava sheyesh lekitzvah. Do we say it's an amount with a limited amount, because we only have one child now who has a bris on Shabbos? Or do we treat it kedava she'ein lo kitzvah? Because the Torah never said how many brises can push away Shabbos. In Tabdino, if we treat it kedava she'ein lo kitzvah, if we treat it as a matter with no limit, the mal will be patur afilu ein sham tinagach elamul, even if there's no other bris to do a bris at that time. Even if the child of Shabbos has already had his bris. In Tabdino kedava sheyesh lo kitzvah, if we treat it as something with a limited amount, then there's another condition. Providing there is another child to have a bris. When you're doing the bris on the child of the Friday bris on Shabbos, you've not yet done the bris on the one which is meant to be done on Shabbos. And that's why it's potter for Torah Dvar Mitzvah, even though it's considered davar sheyesh lekitzvah, it's like a limited amount, because at the end of the day you did have a mitzvah still to do. If, however, the other child has already had his bris, and then you do the Friday one on Shabbos, then you're liable chatos, because the p'tur of Torah Dvar Mitzvah does not apply with something where there's a limit, where you're not torod, you're not bothered at all in the mitzvah. Okay? You want me to carry on a bit more? Is that it? Yes. We stop there.